what we're going through is a digital transformation in our community and society at the moment. We want to use the industry. The fourth industrial revolution is one the driving factor here. As you can see in the PowerPoint slide, that we've gone through several major industrial revolution, and what the driving factor from my perspective of this particular industrial revolution is due to some of the key technology maturity, such as cloud, big data, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. These technologies are not new, but they're sort of became more mature, and so it's a Moore's law state that the complexity doubles every 10 years. So as we see the result of all these things are happening, and also we can relate to different the market acceptance of a different technology. If you see on the lower right hand side the chart there, take a telephone launch takes 75 years to reach 50 million users, but recently we look at the Twitter, Facebook, social media launch would take much less time, and so the growth and the progression we're making in technology definitely is exponential. So having said that, the whole IoT world that we know of is not just limited to smart factory, but there's also a lot of other technology that's coming together. Daniel, can you go to the next slide? Okay, so so if you look at the IoT number of devices out there, I think it depends on what data you're reading. Relatively to population growth and number of cars, mobile phone growth, is by even plot out in a 10x scale, we see a sharp increase starting a couple of years ago. And it depends on what data you read. It could be anywhere between 5 to 10 billion or more devices that's out there. These are smart devices, and so what all these changes are bringing about. If you go to the next slide, please. And so all these changes will actually benefit our society quite a bit, not just the factory enhancement, and there's infrastructure, smart cities, connected offices, and things that they can do to help for better medical services, and also smart homes. And so these are quite significant change, and and a lot of these areas, I think, because of technology maturity, there's a pull to bring these changes about, because the benefit is actually quite high. If you think about the factory, if you can connect to your inventory system, to customer ordering system, and understand that the real-time measurement of your productivity, so all these reasons are very compelling to move forward. So the natural pull is already taking our industry and our communities into this more smarter world. And so this is critical that all these benefits cannot be realized unless there's protection on the cybersecurity side. And so we're actually facing a lot of more challenges, because there's a lot of more things to protect, and the world will be much open. And I think with that, I kind of stage where we are today, and I will hand it off to Richard Koo, and he will share with you, where we are with the cybersecurity and protection side of things.
Great. Thank you so much, Mitchell. And Richard, I will unmute you and we'll take it away.
Okay, can you hear me, Daniel?
You sound great.
Great. Hey, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for taking the time to join us this afternoon. I hope everybody are doing well, given this, interesting and challenging time for us. So today, as Mitchell mentioned, I will be taking a little bit time to talk about industrial cybersecurity, business and technical challenge, and also I will provide some of the best practice, from a industrial control perspective. Now, can you go to the next slide, Daniel? So we'll cover a couple of areas. We'll look at some of the basic threats landscape, specifically around industrial control and how it affects many of the critical infrastructure and many verticals such as oil and gas and powers. That's what we're going to cover. And then I also, based on some of the experience and conversation I have with many of my customers across different industry, I'll lay out some basic, I think fundamental challenge that I think everybody need to be aware of and make sure they know how to address them. And then we'll look at some of the risk model and of course, some best practice. So next slide. So before I actually go to some of the detail, I do want to make sure everybody understand some of the basic definition, right? IoT mean different things to different people. For example, in the consumer space, we talk a lot about, smart watch, maybe a smart refrigerator, right? Those are IoT devices. But what I will be talking about is more about industrial, cybersecurity, right? And, something important to understand is that, the cyber incident, right? Typically, this is more of, de facto, IT definition, right? And I think I want to make sure that people understand that, things that connected to the internet or, running Windows and, and stuff like that, right? And really more about, basically data and malicious information being stolen and manipulated, right? And so it's all about privacy, right? I think that's more of a, IT definition. But in the space that I spend a lot of time on is really more about, the electronic communication between systems that affect, right, the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of the system. And this is a NIST definition, which I use and many people are used throughout the conversation across different industry, right? And so that's also one thing very important. And also in the industrial space, right, we don't really talk a lot about, malicious stuff, but we really more thinking about safety, right? Everything have to do with safety. If you have issue, let's say on the, power plant, you have, or in the, let's say a turbine that go down, right? And, the incident can be life and death. And so safety also become a very important thing to think about. And of course, think about, I don't know how many of you heard or understand what is the Purdue reference model, right? So kind of look at that as something to think about right now, and I will go through that a little bit more detail. And as I mentioned, right, the definition of OT, insider threat and damage, right? And those can be very different from different people, depending on who you speak to or depending on what industry they're coming from. All right, so that's important to think about. Next slide, Daniel. So this is just a very simple, basic layout of a control system, right? In an industrial control environment, you can see, from left to right, and how different devices are being controlled, and and how communication are performed, right? From left to right, you can see that, at the lowest level, you have basically, these are the processors, the I/O, the media, the sensors and devices, right? And it's really talking to some type of, remote systems such as a PLC or RTU control system, and through some kind of protocol such as Ethernet or serial or wireless, right? And then of course you also have a human machine interface, or what we call the HMI machine, right? And this is where the display for the operator and in the kind of control center, right? And then of course you have kind of the support system, which is more at the operational level. So I want you to kind of understand that this is kind of a very high level of basic model on how we talk about in the industrial control environment, how the different device and sensor talk to each other. Next slide. And this is a very important, I think, model, or it is a diagram for everyone to understand on how organization or industrial control environment, implement or set up their system, right? And this Purdue model, reference model, have been around for many, many years, and many organizations actually use this to lay out on how they structure their, environment. And so here on the Purdue model, you can see from level 0 all the way up to level 3, right? This is different level on how the different devices are being implemented or lay out within the networks. And so we're going to talk about that. But on the right side, you can see how and data are being basically transferred and communicate, right, between each level, right? And you can see that from the level 0 to level 1, you're talking about the timeline is really more about millisecond, right? And then millisecond to a second, and then to minutes, right? And then minute to hour. So depending on what level of the device and where the communication happened, the speed in terms of the communication can be very, very fast, right, to hours and days. And so just want to make sure everyone understand this reference model, and we'll come back to a little bit more. All right, next slide. So I'm going to shift gear a little bit and talk about some of the interesting things that we have seen over the last couple of decades when it comes to industrial control environment. Next slide. This is a very high level, right, of industrial attacks timeline and impact, over the last couple of decades. And this is not something I'm not going to walk through every single slide, but this kind of show everyone that this type of incident do happen across different verticals, everything from basically power generation to smart manufacture, right, to different type of industry. And you can see that the very first real incident in the industrial control environment or in critical infrastructure really happened back in 2010, right, where you have the Stuxnet worm, which was actually compromised the Iranian nuclear power plant, and basically it impacted about 20% of the centrifuge, was kind of damaged and become inoperable, right? So that is when we see a real incident happen. And then of course you have some of the incident back in let's say 2015 to 2016, where you had a black energy attack, power plant in basically in Europe was compromised, and thousands of basically resident was out of power due to basically a malware compromise on that kind of environment as well. And then there are some industries such as manufacture, right? You can see here in 2018 there was some incident happened in some smart manufacturer, and and malware was able to compromise some of these smart manufacturer and take down many of their system. And so the effect here, such as TSMC or some of the U.S. Advisor Precision organization, was really kind of compromised by malware. So these are some data points I just want to show that they are real, right? It's not something that we are seeing on say media or stuff like that. These are real. It's really impacting customer and organization around the world. So just a data point to let everybody know. Next slide. And this is some data point that a organization called Applied Control Solution, and what they have been doing was they've been tracking all the industrial control or critical infrastructure incident over the past several years. And as you can see, right, up to now, we have a little bit over 1,200 incidents already that impact this type of critical infrastructure, right? And the impact, can be very significant, from a discharge to equipment damage to outage, which I have mentioned on some of the incident. And there are some more than 70 billion in terms of direct impact into many of the business, from a economic perspective. And most of these, I would say, very few incident, right, impacted this organization, because many of those organizations does not have any kind of skill set or training or knowledge about how to address some of this issue in their environment, and very lack of policies and training in many of these organizations. And most of this industrial control environment, we see many of them, are really connect directly to the internet, right? And you can see here the data show that there are more than 2 million of these industrial control type of device are connected directly to the internet. And this is from many of the very critical infrastructure, as well as some very heavy vertical, like the oil and gas, also connected to the internet. So this is a very good data point to let people know that it is happening, but people just don't really expose a lot of this data, and something that company are taking account of. Next slide, Daniel. We'll skip this slide and we'll go to the next slide. So let me also share you some of my information. I have been talking to a customer. When you have this industrial 4.0 and the convergence of IT/OT and the transformation happening in many organizations, what I see and talk to a lot of customers, and what I hear from them are very couple key things that we want to be able to recognize. One is the lack of domain knowledge, right? There is a insufficient cybersecurity knowledge and expertise and countermeasure, especially in the industrial control environment in this space. So that's a big challenge for many organizations. And when you have this, convergence between IT/OT or industrial 4.0, and you have a lot of new automation, and you have basically the threat vectors and really kind of expanding, right? It creates a lot of challenge in terms of roles and responsibility between IT and OT, and it's not clearly defined, right? For example, today you might have a lot of organizations that have the IT organization in charge of the cybersecurity, but the OT environment or the industrial control side, you may not have anyone that actually responsible for that type of cybersecurity strategy or how to implement cybersecurity. So this is a big challenge for many organizations. And of course, in the legacy environment, or many of these verticals and industry have been around for decades, right? And they have a lot of legacy system, and it is also very, very difficult, right, to create some type of a countermeasure, because this type of system and environment are not designed to basically be deployed with some kind of cybersecurity, right? So it's important to understand that. And in many cases, when I talk to a company, right, cybersecurity is not quite, right, at a very high, I would say, priority in many organizations, right? And so sometimes organizations tend to pursue the productivities or and economic over cybersecurity, right? So this is something that is challenging for many organizations, and you need to be to really have that conversation with the C-level folks in order for you to have that let's say budget or approve for their budget. Another big thing I see a lot is the ROI, right? It's difficult to show ROI for many organizations, and that is a challenge for the cybersecurity, especially come to strategy for the industrial control inside environment. And of course, regulation and leadership support is very important, and that is still a big challenge. So next slide, please. And here's some of the technical challenge, right? As you can see, as the industrial 4.0 come into play and more organizations going through that transformation, right? And more new technologies and capabilities are being adopted, you start to see things such as shadow OT, right? You have a lot of unknown devices connected to the industrial control environment, and that can potentially cause a lot of impact because you are expanding the threat vectors, right? You got a lot of lack of security by design, right? As mentioned, many of these systems have been around for ages and decades, and security was never in the mind of this early design of this type of system and this type of infrastructure. So that's a big issue, and for on the technical side. And you have many of the systems that have been around with a lot of insecure protocol, or some of the applications have been around, or operating system have been around and have never been patched or for many years, right? So that's a big challenge on the technical side. And there isn't a lot of I would say there's a lot of unpatched system, right? And as I mentioned, and what people always say, well, does malware or ransomware or any of this type of attack will it impact this type of environment? Yes, right. We have seen many incidents, across different industry and vertical, from power to waters to smart manufacturers, and they all can and have been compromised by malware like ransomware and stuff like that. So yes, it's also a big challenge for them. And then of course we talk about all the legacy system, all the vulnerabilities, but the key thing here is everybody kind of know about cybersecurity, right? But the big challenge is how do you apply and how to apply, right, cybersecurity to address some of this technical and business challenge correctly, right? And that is a big thing for many organizations. Next slide, please. So this next two slides, I will talk about why there are so many risks a little bit, right? So this is just a very high level risk model, and Mitchell talked about the evolution of the industry 1.0 to 4.0, right? And you can see here on this risk model, what I've created was basically on the left side, right? It's kind of from low to high is the automation and connectivities. And then, on the bottom, it basically is the low to high in terms of business and operational risk and environmental complexity. So as you, right, transform an organization to adopt technologies and capabilities and, connect everything together, from industry 1.0 to 4.0, right? You have that increase in terms of automation, you have the increase in connectivity and complexity. And then you kind of really expanding and you kind of exposing basically the environment into more increasing attacks and sophistication type of attack, right? And so as we transform and more technology adopted, we also have that increase in risk, right? And this is exactly what we are seeing, for many, I think I was evolution, like, we're moving from DOS to Windows and Windows to client server, from LAN to wide area networks, internet, cloud, and virtualization. We see that pattern happen, and for the industrial Internet of Things, or it's the same type of I think scene I'm seeing, right? So how do you reduce risk? Well, if you can increase your visibility, prevention, detection, and response, and increase that collaboration, across your environment and your different organization, that you can really kind of reduce this type of risk, in your environment. Next slide, please. So what are some of the best practice, right? So, what I typically tell my folks, people I spoke to, is understand the big picture, right? It is not about the bits and bytes, but you also need to understand the big picture. And, to me, the three big key pillars is really about people, process, and technology, right? First, the people, right? You need to make sure that the organization understand and staff are trained and educated and aware of cybersecurity and the threat into the environment, right? And you need to make sure that organizations have the professional skills and qualification to deal with incident, right? And you have the company's resource and people to deal with that. So that's top to bottom, right? I think the people is also very important to do. Next thing is the process, right? Make sure there is some level of governance, right? Policy and frameworks are in place. A managed system, some best practice, and some basic IT, OT auditing, tools and strategies that are put in place, in terms of your process. And then the technology itself, right? The technology, there are so many different technologies coming out every day, and how do you find the best technology to make sure that it can be implemented and integrate properly into your industrial control side or some of this, ICS environment. And so this technology need to be able to get tested, verify, and validate to make sure it works, right? And what I have seen is some incident where some organization trying to take an IT product and deploy on the industrial control side, and sometimes it basically create more problem than solving the problem. So it's very important to make sure that these are get tested, verified, and validate before you get deployed into the industrial control side. And of course, you do need, when it comes to technology, right, you do need to have the right people, right, with competence and support process and the kind of overall plan and strategy to make sure that you can deploy properly in the organization. So this is just some high level, I think 3 key pillars that I talk a lot. Here's some industry standards, best practice that I typically recommend for customer, depending on what vertical, what sector you're coming from. For example, these are some good standards, such as for example, in the energy sector, right? You've got things such as the NERC SIP, or the ISO 27000, IEC, right? Those are good standard and frameworks that have been out there for years, and I think it's a good foundation for everyone to look at some of these standard and follow some of the standard, because they are already out there. If you're industrial automation, right, everything from IEC 62443 standard, those are good, and of course IT I standard as well. So these are some of the recommendations I will encourage people to read and download and install. And many of these are available through the internet or throughout some of this organization that you can actually download and get. Is you don't have to reinvent the wheel because it's already there. Next slide. And so what are some recommendation in terms of OT, ICS, cybersecurity, right? As I mentioned earlier, right, in some of these environment, they have been around for ages and decades, and they have old operating system. Many of them not patches, old application, proprietary application. And so what you need to do is to make sure that the solution that you're bringing to the environment, right, is really kind of purpose built for that kind of environment, right? And ensure that you have, number one, the ability to have some visibility across all the asset, the protocol, and when such a thing happen, like if you have some threat happen, you will be able to have some level of threat intelligence and visibility across those. So that's an important component to have. The other big component is the ability to provide some level of real-time protection and enforcement to prevent such an incident from happening, right? And also at the same time, a minimum overhead, right? Because some of these industrial equipment, right, have been around and they have limited memory, and is designed to do one thing and one thing alone, right? And so if you have a full-blown, let's say, anti-malware product, right, they may not always work, or does not work in that kind of environment. So it's important to think about that, something that have minimal impact. And of course, you want to make sure that you can secure the industrial control networks, and ensure that the operational and the reliability and the safety of the system are continue to run. Because in the IT world, right, you might have say a server go down, it may not have a big impact. However, in the industrial control side, right, when you have, let's say, a system that go down, or basically being impacted by a malware or some incident, right, the safety and the cost on that can be very, very big, and can be very costly to the organization. So that's something to think about. when you're securing some of this environment. I also recommend a very comprehensive, right, protection across the different your network environment, all your endpoint, your server, cloud virtualization, also some of all your device, basically old and new, right, in industrial control side, and there are solutions up in the market that you can actually help you do that. And one very important thing, as I mentioned, is the solution, right, need to be able to adapt into your existing IT or your OT infrastructure or your ICS infrastructure in operation, right? It is not a rip and replace environment, right? Because many of these systems have been around for decades, and it will continue to be around for the next 5 to 10 years. And how do you find a solution that can help you to easily deploy and still able to allow the existing infrastructure to continue running, right? And then last but not least, some level of central management for distribution of, new signature and policy and how it can be integrated into your environment. And, if, you have organization that are running some type of a SIEM or SOAR platform, you need to make sure that this type of technologies, the capability you bring into the environment, able to integrate with some of the SIEMs and SOAR platforms so that you have complete visibility across both the IT as well as the OT or ICS environment. Those are some of the very high level, recommendation that I would, suggest. Next slide. This is my second to last slide, but this is an early, a high level reference model that I map into a Purdue model. The slide number 2, I mentioned about the Purdue model, right? And how organizations typically lay out their high level network architecture. You can see here on the left side is kind of your industrial control environment, where it mapped to the Purdue model, reference model, from level 0, 1, 2, 3. And then, of course, you have the cloud and virtualization. And then on the right side is your traditional IT environment, right? And typically in many organizations, you have this component kind of all either connected together or they are completely separate. But as you move from industrial 1.0 to 4.0, you're going to see this convergence happen. And how do you secure, right, this kind of environment, right? And so you can see here, I recommend some solution, right, that can be deployed at the different level, right? From the device and sensor level, right, to from level 0 to the level 1, where you have all the PLC, DCS, those level you can implement, some level of, network IPS or cyber, firewall products. And, across that, you're going to go up to level 2. This is where you have all your HMI machine, your SCADA system, right? You can also deploy cybersecurity directly into the box using some type of whitelisting or some, lockdown solution or some networking product that can be, also deployed there. And of course, to your level 3, this is where your supervisory level, the operational level, where people typically running the traditional Windows and Linux environment. You can also deploy, cybersecurity there. And last but not least, right, if organizations start to adopt cloud and virtualization as part of their transformation, right, you definitely need to secure from the device at the edge all the way up to the cloud and make sure that cloud infrastructure, the cloud workload also being secure, right? So this is just a very high level diagram that, I typically have conversation with my customer. And this also lay out very clear, map kind of clear to the Purdue model, how many industrial control environment are mapped there, the environment. Next slide. So I think, hopefully this gives you a quick overview of, some of the challenge, for organization and some of the threat out there, and, what are some of the best practice and solution that are available today. And as I mentioned, cyber attacks in the industrial control environment are real, right? It can have some very significant impact to your business, right? And downtime. And cybersecurity, it is some very fundamental and foundation for any type of transformation, regardless if you're moving from let's say to the cloud, or through this digital transformation, industrial 4.0. Cybersecurity is just a very fundamental, and we are here, right? As a Trend Micro, but also we are a partner that we really can help a lot of organizations, kind of transform and their business security as they move forward. So I hope this kind of give you a high level overview of what we are seeing out there, and welcome any question you might